Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 595 of the Juicebox Podcast. The title of this one came down to the wire. I was between Plain to Maine and Give a Hoot. I honestly don't even know what I'm going to do when I'm done with this. When I go out and actually type the words into, well, it's a lot of technical stuff that you don't care about, but where you see the title of the episode, I'm still not sure what I'm going to do. Today I'm going to be speaking with Barb. She's the mom of a child with type 1 diabetes. She's got an interesting story about how her child was diagnosed and a ton more. You're just going to listen. I can't, you know what I'm saying here, right? Like, I can't explain the whole podcast to you in 30 seconds. It was a long and winding road. I don't know what we talked about anymore. I just remember having fun and thinking, yeah, Barb was good. While you're listening, please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. Don't forget, in the show notes of your podcast player and at juiceboxpodcast.com, there are links to all of the sponsors. Support the sponsors. Support the show. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Touched by Type 1. They're absolutely my favorite Type 1 diabetes organization, and I would like very much for you to check them out at touchedbytype1.org. They're also on Facebook and Instagram. I also want to thank the over 300 supporters at buymeacoffee.com/juicebox podcast. Just nice people who get motivated once in a while to buy me a coffee. It's a really kind thing that you do. There's like 35 members and over 300 people who have done it at least once. And I would love to thank each one of you in person, but since I can't, I'm just going to say it here. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. It is very kind. Your messages are extraordinary. The ones that you leave there at Buy Me a Coffee. Oh, now I said the thing and it's buymeacoffee.com/juicebox. The messages that you leave there are just stunning and touching, and I very much appreciate them.
I'm Barbara. I'm the mom of a daughter that has type 1, and she was diagnosed last year. I'm also a registered dietitian, and we live in suburban Chicago.
Nice. Okay, so last year, 2020?
Yes, right. About 6 months into the pandemic.
Oh, how old was she then?
So she was 10.
10. Got it. I'm now making notes. My wife brought me this really cool little whiteboard.
I've heard about this. I'm trying to get one for my husband. He's a lawyer, but he likes old school legal pads. So it's going to be a big switch in our household.
I've just, it's like, so it kind of sits in front of me while I'm doing this, and I can, like, so it doesn't make noise. Like when I'd write stuff down on paper and it would be loud. So I can kind of make notes while I'm going in case there's something I want to remember to say, which that's where it's become very helpful, because I'll think of a question, and if I can't keep it in my head, then I lose it. So now I'm just sort of like one wording, like jotting a word down and then coming back to it.
It triggers it. Yeah, that's so smart.
No one tell my wife what a good gift this was. So I don't want her to.
I might buy one for my husband.
I don't want her holding this over my head, but she will. Any autoimmune stuff in your family?
None. It actually, and I mentioned earlier that I'm a registered dietitian. And honestly, even when I was in school, I didn't really learn about type 1. So, I mean, they it was a section that we learned about in school, but we never really went into depth because we didn't see a lot of patients with type 1. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of so far off my radar.
How long ago was school?
So I've been a registered dietitian now for 12 years.
Do you have, I asked because I'm wondering if you remember what they said about diabetes while you were in school.
It's so interesting because I have a visual in my head of, like one of those choking posters where, like the
I know what
signs
you're
and
talking
symptoms,
about.
like excessive thirst.
Yep, I know what you're talking about. My daughter's there was one hanging in my daughter's school that was about signs of hypoglycemia, and they're all just like
Yes,
different cartoon faces with different levels of like horror on their. Do you know what I mean?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So that was sort of like the visual that I had in my head, but it wasn't something that we didn't even know anyone at the time that had type 1.
And
So
the schooling didn't go deeply into it.
it didn't go deeply into it.
Okay. Well, that seems to be about par for the course. But I assume too that course, or I didn't mean to use course twice, but your dietitian, that situation, or even being a nurse, everything's an overview. You're not deep diving on anything until you get into a specialty, I guess.
100%. And, I'm in private practice. So most of what I see is weight loss or sometimes weight gain or healthy eating. Occasionally I see autoimmune conditions, but they're fewer and farther between.
Mm-hmm. Do people ever come to you for to get like a food out of their diet? Like somebody comes along and says, I'm celiac now and I need to know how to transition to it. Do you ever get that kind of question?
100%. And, actually, I don't know if it's a coincidence, but I've, been seeing more clients that have autoimmune issues right now. And there are a lot of elimination diets that are now very common, trying to find certain things that trigger inflammation.
Right.
So I feel like I'm dealing with that a lot more.
People trying to get rid of like psoriasis, stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow. That's interesting. I wonder if you're seeing it more, or if it's like when you buy a new car and then suddenly you see them on the road everywhere.
I mean, 100%. I also have to say, since the pandemic, I've been really busy because I feel like a lot more people have been home. So people are taking time to do things like, figure out their diets and, do more things for self-care.
Yeah.
So it might just be just the sheer volume of what I'm seeing.
Yeah. Maybe.
Too.
I guess when you get extra time, when you're not doing all the things that you used to do, you lose the excuse of like, oh, I would, but I don't have time. Now you're like, oh, darn, I have time now. I'm going to have to do something. I can't keep telling myself that, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay. So she's diagnosed at 10. Did it come on in the classic way? Do you have like, were you on an airplane over the Atlantic Ocean? Because
I mean, pretty much. I mean, I had to get on an airplane, not over the Atlantic Ocean, but, when COVID struck in March, my girls, had sort of been home, and my daughter was dying to go to camp, and her sleepaway camp was one of the few camps that were running, and we were a little bit nervous to send her, but she begged us to go. So the camp said that they were taking every precaution, to prevent COVID. Including, I think, 3 tests right before she left. And we had to do like a temperature check for a week. And so we decided to send her. And she actually got on a plane and went with another family to camp. And about a week and a half into camp, I got a text message from one of the directors of the camp saying that, she wasn't feeling well. She had thrown up a couple of days before. And they said that they had given her a couple of COVID tests and it was negative. They also asked if she had a history of eating disorders because she was restricting her food. So I got, very concerned. And I asked to speak with her on the phone. And I spoke with her on the phone, and I could tell that she was sort of slurring her words. Mm-hmm. She was crying a lot. So I very quickly hung up the phone and FaceTimed her. And I noticed that she just, she really didn't look well. She had lost some weight, which, it ended up, all the information kind of came out later. She had lost about 13 pounds in the matter of a week and a half. And my first reaction was just to tell them to take her to the emergency room.
Yeah.
Because, we were so far away. I didn't know what to do. So the first thing that I could think of was just to have them take her to the emergency room.
Can you say a little more about how it felt to be that far from her when she was struggling?
I mean, there were so many factors in place. It was so hard. I mean, I think, any parent that sends their child to camp, whether the camp is, a couple hours away, or in this case, 20 something hours away, if to not be with your child when they're not feeling well is it's so difficult. You just, you hope that they're in good hands. And at the time we felt like, she had all this stuff going on and she wasn't in good hands.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really hard. And then, when she finally, was receiving care, I couldn't get a flight because, remember, it's about 6 months into the pandemic. So people weren't really flying.
Yeah. Wow. How far was she from you? Like states away or?
She was states away. So we're in suburban Chicago and she was in Maine.
Wow.
So, and if you think about that, and she's kind of in rural Maine, so the closest town being Portland, which is still, a distance. So it was not easy to get to. And had I driven, I mean, it would have taken longer than just waiting until the next day to get a flight.
Yeah. Did they try rubbing seafood on her? Were they using all the Maine tricks, I wonder?
I know. You know what? It might have been better than what they were doing because, later it turned out that they were giving her Gatorade because she wasn't eating and was refusing to eat and vomiting, which, I mean, you can only imagine Gatorade. To this day, she cannot look at Gatorade.
Did that happen at the camp?
That happens at the camp.
Yeah. Well, counselors are not, they're usually younger, right?
They are. And, they had, sort of a strange set of circumstances because it was COVID. Normally they get a lot of foreign counselors that are a little bit older. And because people weren't traveling, I guess like with the travel visas and stuff, they ended up with a bunch of younger counselors from the US.
Right.
And I just felt like weren't really well trained.
Weren't well equipped for them to diagnose type 1 diabetes. Like that wasn't on their to-do list either. Plus everyone, when you really look back, everyone has to be freaked out, right? In the beginning of COVID. And now there's this kid that's super sick. Everyone's looking at her going like, that kid's got COVID.
100%. I mean, she said she had something like 5 COVID tests. And you know how unpleasant. I mean, I was very fortunate. I got vaccinated before I needed a COVID test. But the swab goes all the way up your nose. And my daughter said it felt like she was drowning. And they did 5 of them.
Yeah. Because they wanted to prove she had COVID so they could put her somewhere and be done with her. And they
Exactly.
didn't know what to do. And well, that's, I have a tiny bit of a similar situation. I mean, not similar with diabetes, but my son was in Florida playing baseball with his college team. And I was there watching. And he got sick, like and it wasn't like into COVID. It was like those couple of weeks, excuse me, like, when I think mid-March is when everyone kind of came to like grips with like, oh, this is a thing and I'm going to go into my house now. So this was like the week before that. And it's just rumblings. Like, you still hear people saying like, did you hear on the news? There's a thing. I wonder if it's going to be a problem. Like it was still like that. For most people, and my son gets a viral infection while he's there. So luckily that what he had was treatable with antibiotics. And, so I might not have meant viral infection. I'm not exactly certain. Obviously, I'm not a medical person, but he got something that was treatable with antibiotics. But as soon as he got sick, people backed away from him like he was on fire.
Right.
And then we got the antibiotics into him and it made him better very quickly. And then you had to basically go from person to person to go, listen, antibiotics don't work on viruses. If this was COVID, he wouldn't be getting better. And then you're counting on people knowing that that's true. And it was just everybody was at 2 arms lengths from him at that point. It was very
100%.
interesting. Yeah. So I can see that happening for certain to your daughter as well.
Yes. And, there's this added dimension of her being at an all girls camp and there being some drama. I think, one thing that COVID has sort of done is it's made everybody a little bit, I don't want to say antisocial, but, these were kids that were basically, at home or homeschooled on their devices since March. And all of a sudden, they're away at camp with a bunch of other 10-year-old girls. So there was definitely an element of girl drama. And they kept, citing girl drama as an example that she was restricting her food. So it was just so many different things at once. It was just very overwhelming.
And things started getting confused. And
yes.
Yeah, they were pointing at one thing and thinking it was something else. And yeah,
definitely.
Did the girls back away from her? Did she experience that?
Yes, because, she had vomited a couple of times, which is often a sign of DKA. And everybody was so freaked out because that's also a sign of COVID. So there were some girls in the bunk that were kind of taunting her, saying that she had COVID. I mean, it was a lot.
Yeah, no kidding. That sucks.
Yes.
How long did it take you to get to her? A day?
So we found out, so I got the text from the camp director, I want to say around 3 p.m. And she basically, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but she said, no rush. But of course, as a parent with a child multiple states away during this time, I called immediately.
Yeah.
By the time they finally got her to the emergency room, it was about 5 p.m. And so when I got the call from the emergency room, my husband was simultaneously looking at flights. Mm-hmm. So the next flight that I could get was 8 a.m. the next morning.
Were you on your own private plane? Was it that part of COVID?
I wish I could have,
No, I don't mean, can you afford a private plane? I mean, were there not many people on the flight?
Oh, there was hardly anybody on the flight. I had like 2 rows to myself.
Yeah, we flew home. When I flew home from Florida, I was on a flight, on a full flight with like 9 other people. So like, like a giant plane with 9 other people. We were just spread out as far as we could. People were like laying across 3 seats. It was the most comfortable I've ever been flying in my entire life.
It's so funny. And I feel like that just changed very quickly. Now it's back to being, pre-pandemic levels.
Yeah, no, I was on a plane. It's June now when you and I are talking. I just was on a plane and it was packed. So,
yes.
But okay. So she goes, they finally, you tell them to take her to the emergency room. So is she diagnosed without you there? All right. This is a super short ad break. I'm just reminding you to go to touchedbytype1.org. It's a wonderful organization doing things for people with type 1 diabetes. Touchedbytype1.org. The 1 is a 1, like the number 1, right? So like touch, that's T-O, I'm not going to spell touch for you. And then by, and then type, and then the number 1.org. Touchedbytype1.org. They're also on Instagram and Facebook, and you will spend no better few minutes of your life today than if you check them out. Touchedbytype1.org. Touchedbytype1.org. I don't know if I've ever done this on the podcast, but since I mentioned the Buy Me a Coffee link at the beginning of the episode, I want to tell you that I'm sitting right now in an incredibly comfortable, well-built, and supportive chair that was bought for me by the people who listen to this podcast. And it changed my life this year. An expensive chair is not something I would have spent money on my own. Tiny little story here is that at one point on Facebook, someone just kind of got the idea, like they wanted to do something nice for me. And that's how this Buy Me a Coffee thing got started. And before I knew it, there was so much money being put into it. I mean, I don't know. It's Buy Me a Coffee is just kind of a name. Like, I don't actually drink coffee. I assume you understand that. Anyway, I just was so grateful, and I had this money now, and I didn't know what to do with it. And so I said to people, like, I can't just, like, I don't want to just put this money in my pocket. Like, I want to do something for the podcast. I want you guys to get something out of it. And some kind people asked what I needed, and I just said, like, a more comfortable, supportive chair would be a big deal. My back feels so much better than it used to. I spend a lot of time sitting in this chair making this podcast for you. Anyway, it's a weird little thing that I just never thought would happen in my life. It's odd and nice. And I don't know. You'd have to be in my shoes to know what I'm talking about, to see a bunch of people, like hundreds of people, come together and say, Scott, I want you to be more comfortable. Take $5 and buy yourself a chair. It was really like one of the more surprising and lovely things that happened to me this year. Anyway, if you want to do it too, I mean, I'll take your money. buymeacoffee.com/Juicebox Podcast. It is really just a kind of a super fan thing to do, I guess, but it means a lot to me. So thank you very much.
She is. And I don't want to forget one thing, because
Please.
I think we have, oh yes.
No, I'm sorry. Whatever you want to say, go ahead. Go back to what you were thinking.
We have a little bit of an interesting connection. So one of the things that I did after I spoke with her on the phone, so they handed me the phone to speak with her, and I very quickly switched the phone to FaceTime,
right,
just so I could get a look at her.
Yeah.
And once I had a look at her was when I insisted that they take her to the emergency room.
Yeah.
But this is kind of like, post story. But months later, my husband had a friend that told him that he should write to Tim Cook and tell him basically that FaceTime saved our daughter's life.
Well, at the very least, it let you look her in the face, right? And there's a lot to be inferred from that.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, I took a look at her and she had these big dark circles under her eyes, and she looked terrible, and she couldn't even sit upright, and she said her stomach hurt. But anyway, my husband and I had this little contest where he wrote Tim Cook, and and I wrote him as well. But my husband said that his letter was, sort of more concise and to the point. So I was like, okay, fine. So my husband sent the letter. Months later, we don't hear anything. And so I sent my letter, and literally within 24 hours, I got a letter back from Tim Cook thanking me for my letter and saying that it's stories like mine that, make them go on and do all the things that they do.
But more importantly, it proved that your husband's letter sucked.
Exactly.
Yeah. That really is the most important part. It's funny. You said a minute ago, you were like, we have this interesting connection. And I was like, ooh, me and you?
I thought you had some kind of Apple story.
I do,
You have an iPhone story. Yes.
Yeah, I do. When the first iPhone came out, the very first iPhone, I got one. Back then, you had to I stood in an alleyway behind a cell phone store for hours to get it. Actually, with Adam, who's the doctor who came on and talked about COVID a lot during COVID, he and I just stood behind an iPhone store for a couple of hours and got our phone. Anyway, I was migrating my pictures onto it, and I was super excited. And I know that's hard for people to believe now, but having a handheld device that would hold your photos or that even could have your calendar on it was unheard of at that moment. Like, it just didn't exist, like in a real functional visual way. And so my wife was leaving for work one day, and I just stopped her to show her. And she's like, I have to go. And I'm like, no, look at this. And I only held her up for 30 seconds. You know what I mean? Like she had to get out the door. And as she drove down our driveway and then pulled onto the street, only a few seconds ahead of her, a tree fell across the road, like this big branch from this tree, like this giant branch that would have like easily crushed anyone's car. And I was like, oh my God, I saved your life by showing you my iPhone. And I wrote that, Adam, actually, I wrote it up in an email, and I shared it with a couple of friends, and Adam was like, send it to Apple. And I did. And maybe a few weeks later, I was contacted by a law firm in New York that wanted me to sign an NDA before they would continue to have a conversation with me. So they reached out to me and said, hi, we'd like to talk to you about something. We can't tell you what it is. If you sign an NDA, we'll tell you why we're contacting you. And I was like, I am fascinated. So I did that, and it was Apple. So I got flown out to Los Angeles, me and about 30 other people. And each of us made iPhone story commercials. And I think they picked 6 of them that actually made it onto television. Mine did not make it onto TV, and I still made like $11,000 and got a week off and got to go make a commercial.
That's amazing.
But I don't think I was tall enough or thin enough. I'm not sure exactly what I wasn't enough of. But mine didn't make it. It was still an amazing experience though. And it was from doing that. I don't know if that stuff, if anybody would even remember those, but there was like I'm an airline pilot, and I use my iPhone to check the weather before I get to the airport. Like, it was super simple stuff like that, because the phone didn't really do very much.
Right.
Without apps, like, really think about your phone. Without an app, it's useless. And
Yes.
back then there was no app store really. So anyway, that was it. You didn't get to go to Hollywood like I did though.
No. My story had a very different ending, but
You just got to mock your husband.
Exactly.
Oh
We know who's going to write all the letters in the house.
Well,
from now on.
I mean, also who's going to shut their mouth, I would think. So how did was there someone with her in the hospital for the first hours before you could get there?
So basically what happened, as I mentioned, it was sort of rural Maine and there wasn't a major medical center, but because she was clutching her stomach, they thought maybe at the very least she needed a sonogram. And this one hospital that was near the camp didn't have that kind of technology. So they thought that they were going to transfer her to a bigger medical center. But when she arrived at the first emergency room, one of the nurses thought to do a finger stick. And when they did a finger stick, they found out that her blood sugar was 600.
Wow. So then they get her going. And where was she by the time you got to her? What state?
So she was in Maine. She was in Portland.
Yeah, I didn't mean state like that. I meant like what state was her health in? Sorry. As I said that, I realized that I shouldn't have said it like that.
So I guess at the time, what the nurse said to me was that she basically said, we just did a finger stick and she's in something called DKA, which I actually had to Google. Mm-hmm. And she explained that, it's often when children get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. She explained how high her sugar was. And this was like in those movies when, people are listening to their doctor and their doctor tells them that they have cancer and they don't hear anything.
Yeah.
So my husband was sitting there while I was on the phone and I felt like he was sort of Googling so we could, figure out what was going on. It was just very overwhelming.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay. So how long was she in the hospital?
So she was in the hospital for 3.5 days. So she was in the ICU for a couple of days. I guess the standard protocol is to very slowly bring the blood sugar down with insulin. And what they basically had to do is, since she had to be transferred from the rural hospital to the major medical center, they had to give her an insulin drip in the ambulance as she was going. And they mentioned to me that there were, slight risks involved, which is, just another thing that terrified me. Mm-hmm. And so when I arrived, she was in the ICU.
Okay. So when she gets cleared to leave the hospital, I'm assuming you're getting right on a plane.
Yes. And that was terrifying.
Yeah.
Because I basically went, they won't allow you to leave the hospital with a child that has type 1 unless you've gone through this education piece, mm-hmm. so that I know how to give her insulin. So I left the hospital with needles, with insulin. I mean, it was like I had to navigate, having a child that could barely walk because, as I mentioned, she lost 13 pounds. She could barely move. And I had all of this stuff with me.
I couldn't bring myself to leave the parking garage to make the 30-minute ride back to the house we were staying in. And we were in the hospital for 5 days. We were so scared to leave the hospital. We left the hospital, went downstairs, went right into the cafeteria and had lunch because I think we didn't want to leave the building.
Yeah, and then, it was terrifying.
Yeah. And then you had to get on a plane. But were you in that like ignorance is bliss thing? Did you not know enough about it to be like properly terrified? Were you just terrified of the big, like the specter and not of something specific?
Well, I feel like I had two bad options, right? Because I definitely didn't want to leave the hospital. That's for sure. I mean, it was so uncomfortable and I barely slept, but I definitely felt safer in the hospital. But remember, we're in Maine. And so my other option was to stay in a hotel overnight with her or get on a plane and at least be home and have the support of my husband, and we know some doctors. Mm-hmm. So it was almost like, what's better? So it was terrifying to be on the plane, but I also didn't want to stay overnight with her in a hotel, if that makes sense.
No, that trust me, that all makes sense. I'm fascinated by that idea that you had to be thrust, like it wasn't just a quick ride back to the house.
Yeah.
That was really something. So you made it, obviously. because
Yes.
you made it back. Most of your fears unfounded. Did you have any trouble?
Well, so we had this one crazy thing in the airport. So when my daughter got, transferred to the hospital from camp, they sent her with a backpack. And I didn't really think to look in the backpack before we got to the airport. So as I'm taking her through security, and my daughter sort of goes through security first, we find out that she has this water bottle that she really likes, and it's filled. So they made me get out of the security line and go empty the water bottle and then come back. And she was already, my newly diagnosed type 1 daughter is all the way on the other side of the metal detector. And I had to leave her. So that was a little bit panic inducing.
Did it feel, see, that's interesting for people to understand. Like what did you walk away from her? 30 feet? And it felt like you were leaving her in another country, right?
100%. I was just terrified.
I can relate to that idea. Like I can't walk away from her. Like I have to stand right here in case something happens. That
yes.
I thought you were going to say that there was like a fishing knife in her bag or something like that. That you guys were up against the wall.
I mean, the irony of the whole thing, it was a filled water bottle. So like, I felt like she needed the water all along in camp when she's getting Gatorade. And then, I end up having to empty it out at the airport.
Finally, we've got the right thing in our hands and we're dumping it away. But that feeling of like even being separated by feet in that situation.
Yes.
Oh, I definitely know what you're talking about. I have had that exact thought. Like I have to be here, like right next to her. How long did it take for that feeling to go away, or has it not?
No, it's gotten better over time, as we've started to give her more and more independence. I mean, she's 11 now. I kept her remote this year for school, because it was a new condition because of COVID. We just sort of wanted to get a handle on her blood sugar, and having her home was the easiest way to do it. Mm-hmm. So as we've had her home and we've been able to manage things better, we've started to give her more and more independence. And also, she has a Dexcom, and that's huge. I feel like she can be feet away from me and I can see what's going on with her blood sugar and text her if I feel like, it's going too high or too low. Yeah. So that's a game changer.
You're really very new to this still. It's interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. Is it going anywhere near how you hope?
I mean, we're definitely trending in the right direction. The past couple of doctor's appointments, her hemoglobin A1C has been a 6.7.
Oh, good for you.
Down from 13 when she was initially diagnosed.
Yeah, that's a nice leap. I know it's funny. I feel stupid saying this, but did you have like a focus for coming on? I don't remember. I don't really.
Oh, yeah. So I think it was like sort of twofold. Number one, right before we sent her to camp, she had a full physical. Mm-hmm. So when she had a full physical, like we thought everything was fine and she was perfectly healthy, and we were able to send her halfway across the country. And literally within a week and a half of being gone, she ended up in the ICU. So my husband and I had this moment of, something should have been done in the pediatrician's office. Like there should be this like universal standard of care where they at least do a finger stick, because they don't really take blood work from children. So unless like you see the signs and symptoms of something going wrong, there's no reason for them to even look at blood work. Whereas adults, have physicals every year and they take blood. Mm. So I think I was just, I feel like I would love at some point for pediatric practices to adopt this, just like easy finger sticks, get a baseline, of what's going on with the children, because it really would have helped us so much.
Did you feel like you paid to rotate your tires before a road trip and got a flat tire anyway? And then
100%.
Yeah. And then you felt like, oh, I did everything I could do and this still didn't work. Well, I mean, so I'm not going to disagree with you. And, but I would say that I think this might be a thing that if you wait 5 years and think back on it, you won't feel similarly. I'm not certain.
Right.
And there's no way for me to we could put it on our calendars, I guess, and, and reach out to each other. But I think that when you're first going through a diagnosis in the first year or so, there is that, there are a lot of feelings that are similar to what you just brought up. Like, somebody should do something. There should be a way to this whole thing, except I think maybe there isn't. I don't disagree with you that you could finger stick every kid on the planet and maybe you'd catch some of them with a high blood sugar. I'm sure you would. But if you look at that from the perspective of people who never get diabetes, I bet you hear them say, I don't want you to finger stick my kid. Like, I wonder how much of that becomes perspective because of what happened to you. But I don't disagree. It's an incredibly, I think at the very least, when kids come in with flu-like symptoms, they should check their blood sugar.
Yes.
For certain, because there you're definitely going to catch some kids and keep them from getting, into decay or deeper into it. But I do know how you feel. Like, is that a helpless feeling? I like to dig into the psychology of it a little bit. Does it make you feel like nothing's within your control?
It definitely does, but also I think about it a little bit differently too, because I feel like, sometimes in the first year of a diagnosis, you have all this kind of fire underneath you, and you feel like that's when you want to see changes made. And so it keeps me hopeful in a way, because I feel like maybe at some point it will be a standard of care, because you're hearing about more and more type 1 diagnoses. Someone sent me a study recently as related to COVID, that they think COVID might trigger type 1. So
I want to be careful when we say that, because I think what you're going to find is that it's not that COVID gives you type 1 diabetes, is that COVID puts your body in a stressful situation. You very likely had the markers for type 1 diabetes already, and this is the thing that propelled it. I know, and to say COVID triggers type 1 it's like a headline statement that absolutely is. I understand what you're saying. It's true in context,
but it doesn't explain the specific mechanism. Of course.
Yeah. Yes. You don't magically get diabetes when you get COVID. You're a person who has antibodies, markers that are making it clear that you are going to get diabetes at some point. Something throws you into that situation. Could be anything, really.
100%. And, the fact that, a hemoglobin A1C, it's a measure of your blood sugar over the past 3 months. The fact that when they did it in the hospital and hers was 13, it meant that her sugar had been running high
for a while,
for months before she ended up at that point.
Yeah.
So, there's a certain element of, oh my goodness, she was complaining about headaches. And we thought, well, she was spending a lot of time on the screens and wasn't wearing her glasses.
Right.
So,
No, yeah. Oh, it's the worst. Listen, the first time in your life, especially attached to your children, that you recognize that we're all on a rock hurling through space and nothing happens for any reason that you can figure out. It's a hard thing to swallow, that, your decisions don't lead to ultimate safety, I guess. You know what I mean? You get, look, I was very careful when I was a kid. I grew up really broke. And I looked around and I thought, I have to establish credit. So I remember getting a credit card to Sears and buying something just so I could pay it off, so that I could start building credit. I was only 18 years old, right? And that made me feel safer. And my home makes me feel safe. But the truth is, if 3 ill-intended people wanted to get into my house right now, they absolutely could. But I feel safe. And, you try to get a house in the nicest neighborhood you can, so you can feel safe, so you can feel like you're sending your kids to good schools. And it's all true right until, a meteor crashes into you. And then you realize that none of this had anything to do with you. You were just getting lucky the whole time.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's a hard pill to swallow, as a person who cares about another human being and you're trying to keep them healthy and alive, to realize that something random could happen. I heard someone say recently, I was listening to an interview somewhere, and the man had a near-death experience, And he said that what stuck with him most when it was over was that you could be talking to somebody and an hour later they might not be here anymore, and that there's no way to know that's going to happen or not happen. And that he found it frightening and freeing at the same time. So I don't know. Yeah. It just made me think of that when you were saying that, because I completely understand the idea of wanting to create as good of a situation as you possibly can, and yet not losing sight of the fact that, you know, random things happen, and sometimes people are in the way of it. It's terrible. I mean, don't get me wrong. That's not what should happen. But I mean, for me, I always kind of go back to this feeling of, if you could go find me right as I was getting ready to have my first kid, and somebody came, I don't know, popped out of space and time and said, look, you know, you're going to have 2 children, and, you know, here are all the health issues that are going to happen for your wife as you get older, for you as you get older, for your son, for your daughter. Like, you're going to have a car accident one day. Like, you know, all this stuff is going to happen. You can't stop it. I don't know if I even would have believed it, because when I was young back then, I just thought, if I make good decisions, I'll put us in good positions and we'll have good outcomes. But, you know, then a girl hits you in the bumper when you're waiting at a stop sign, and you realize she's on a different path than you are, and now suddenly you're in her way. So I don't know. It's frightening, the whole thing. Do you have other children too?
Yeah. So I have a younger daughter as well.
Okay.
An 11-year-old and a 9-year-old.
Do you have concerns about diabetes for them?
Well, so I think I heard about it on your podcast, but T1D Exchange, you know, they have a whole database, but they also offer blood tests. So you can test everybody in your family to see if they have the markers for type 1 as well.
TrialNet.
Oh, TrialNet. Yeah. Sorry, TrialNet.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah. Listen, pimp everybody out that's been on the show. That's fine.
I know.
May I
will.
Watch this?
We have an Omnipod too, and we're obsessed.
Barb, do you want to see something that you might find creepy but a little interesting? Watch this.
Yeah.
If you just go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox now, and you're a U.S. resident who has type 1 diabetes, or a U.S. resident who's the caregiver of someone for type 1, you can join the T1D registry, T1D Exchange registry. Well, it's easier when I can edit it, isn't it? Hold on a second. You will be asked a few simple questions. None of them are deep or probing. It's 100% HIPAA compliant, completely anonymous, and your answers will help other people living with type 1. T1dexchange.org/juicebox. It's not bad, right?
No.
I could do those in my sleep. I love the T1D Exchange and what they're doing, but TrialNet is where you can get checked for the marker. So you did it for the other?
Yeah. So I did it. And then my husband, I think you can, for TrialNet, you have to be 45 and under. So my husband, he's 52. Mm-hmm. And so he did it through, I think JDRF offered something too.
I believe
so.
Right.
We've all tested. Oh, I'm sorry.
I know JDRF's is like, it costs like $50 and TrialNet's free or something like that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But TrialNet, you can only do up until age 45. So we all tested and none of us had the antibodies.
Well, that's cool. Now I think TrialNet isn't retesting anymore if you get no antibodies. But I think that they used to. I wonder if that's not a financial decision on their part, because they're funded by other people. Whereas I guess you can always buy it through the JDRF, the one they're doing.
Yes.
Yeah. I think TrialNet might end up being a sponsor at some point. I feel like I remember having a conversation with them a couple weeks ago.
Well, if you want me to pimp out Omnipod, we actually did the free trial through the Juicebox podcast.
Oh,
just so you know.
Thank you. Yes. Did you get the free no obligation demo, or did you get the free 30-day trial of the Omnipod Dash?
We got the free trial of the Omnipod Dash.
Oh, you did 30 days.
Yes.
That's cool. All right, listen, let's just remind everybody that they're advertisers, but this isn't an ad, but I want to know how that went. So you contact them, because I talk about it all the time, but I've never done it, obviously. You contact them. They get you out 30 days worth of pods, a PDM, get you all set up and going. Does that have to go through your doctor, or does it just straight
It
through?
does.
Okay.
It does, because I think they want to make sure, if you're making that kind of a commitment, that you'll be able to continue with it. And initially it wasn't covered by our insurance, but we heard so many positive things about it that we said, we'll try it. And then honestly, I think we paid for 1 month out of pocket, and then our insurance decided to cover it. So it worked out.
Yeah. Oh, that's excellent. That one's omnipod.com/juicebox. People, support the podcast. What are you doing? I have bills to pay too. So, no, that's really cool. I love Omnipod. I mean, they're sponsors because of how I feel about them. I could have, I'm sure I could have gotten an ad from a different insulin pump, but this is the one that I've seen a ton of benefit from for Arden, and it's been like a real, like genuine, help to us over a decade now. So I'm glad that you got it and that you like it. That's very cool. How do you find the podcast?
So I initially found the podcast by the woman. I'm going to give her a huge shout out, but she has type 1, the woman who does my eyebrows at Benefit. And I had actually,
I love these stories.
I had brought my daughter with me, and we noticed that she was wearing a pump. She had the Medtronic pump. And so I gently tapped at my daughter and I said, look, she has a pump. And so then my daughter said to her, I have type 1 too. And they got into a whole conversation. And I feel like I was going to get my eyebrows done more often than I needed to, because she was such a great resource. But she was initially the one that told me about the podcast.
I love hearing how people find out from each other. That's so interesting to me. And I have this visual of your brows getting thinner and thinner, and you're like, I hate how my brows look now, but this girl knows so much about diabetes.
The opposite sort of happened. I actually over time told her to do less and less. And it was more like therapy for me, just like sitting there and getting all of her tips on things.
That's really
because
cool.
I think she's in her 30s and was diagnosed in her teens.
I have to tell you that I'm smiling very big. I have such a big smile from that. That's very, very cool. Also, if people are interested, Arden gets her brows threaded, not waxed. So if you have a threading professional around you, you should try it. It's fascinating. Really, really cool. Have you ever seen anybody do it?
Yes, I've had it done before.
Okay.
But I think I can never switch, because this is I feel like I learn something every time I go see her, and my brows look good.
Let me ask you this. I'm going to admit this on the podcast. The person who cuts my hair is fine, but I don't love what she does. And I want to switch to another person at the place, but I feel too bad to do it.
I think that's a tough one.
It is, right?
But it depends how long they've been working in the business, because I feel like they end up developing a thick skin, because it must happen all the time.
I just want to see, there's this guy in there, and I just want to see what he's going to do with my hair. That's all. And I find myself thinking, this is going to sound crazy. I find myself thinking, maybe I can figure out what days my person works and get an appointment on a day when she's not there with the other guy. I don't, Barb, generally speaking, don't care about stuff like this at all. And this one thing, even Arden's just try the other person. I'm like, I can't. She's so nice. I don't know. I don't know how to do it. I feel terrible. I just have to do it. All right.
Yeah.
I don't know how we got on this, how my brain jumped to this, but
I think we were talking about grooming.
No. I know how we got to it. I'm just I don't know why I'm talking about it now and admitting to everybody that I want to switch hairdressers, but I'm scared to hurt someone's feelings. I really want to. This guy looks like he would do such a better job. I don't know why, but anyway, it's not a gender thing. He just seems to, I don't know. I have really great hair. Barb, it's something you don't know about me. It needs a pro touch. You know what I mean? Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, so how do you think your daughter's doing? A year into it, are you pretty comfortable? I mean, the numbers sound great. Sounds like you guys are getting a handle on everything. But I mean, how is she doing personally?
So She has her good days and her bad days. You actually had a podcast recently about mood and blood sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And we definitely see that with her, because as like the pump is relatively new for her. And we're constantly, adjusting her doses and stuff. And, I feel like all this stuff happens in a year, like all the freak technology stuff, like, we put the Dexcom and the Dexcom falls off, or like we put the pump on and it's a bad site. So, it's like it's still a huge learning curve. And I feel like that definitely affects her. I would say, she's not ready to deal with it yet. And maybe partially like the trauma of the diagnosis. I mean, she's interested, in when I'm bolusing her, and she asked a lot of questions, but I would say, I'm still like her external pancreas. I'm still,
I would imagine
doing most of it.
Yeah, that's not going to end anytime soon. But
no.
So when you say she has good days and bad days, what's an example? Is that an example of her feelings, or is that an example of things going better so the day goes better?
I think it's both.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes like when her blood sugar is in like great range all day, she'll say to me, Mom, I'm having a great day. I feel great. And then other days when it's a little bit higher, she'll say, I don't feel so good. I just feel like I have no energy. There's also, a little bit, and a lot of this, I guess happens in the beginning where, her sister will eat something like ridiculously sugary and she'll say, well, I can't have that. Or, you're going to have to give me so much insulin for this. So like a little bit of resentment toward her sister that doesn't have type 1. But we've been able to get her some help, which I think has been huge.
Okay.
I think it's, it's sort of part of the process of going through this.
Yeah. She's talking to somebody.
Yes.
Yeah. That's good.
I mean, part of it is, the whole trauma of how she was diagnosed. That was huge. So it's like she had that on top of COVID, and then her diagnosis. So it's, there's a lot.
Do you think when you say resentment towards her sister, do you think it's towards the person, or do you think it's towards just anybody who can? Do you think it's just because that person's there in front of them?
I think it's because she's there in front of her.
Okay.
100%.
Yeah. Do you see it translate to other aspects of life, or is it mostly around food and accessibility to eating when you want, those sorts of things?
I think it's mostly related to that because, it's always funny. You hear these stories about kids that are like terrors at home and the teachers say that they're like complete joys, I think she like reins it in all the other areas. But when it comes to her sister, that's sort of when it comes out a lot.
Yeah. Do you think that the sister's younger, right?
Yes.
Do you think she takes any like joy in being able to eat something that your daughter can't?
100%.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, she's, yeah. And, it's my husband and I feel like we're sort of trying to find our way a little bit. I'm a registered dietitian, so I've always kept like a super healthy household. Mm-hmm. But I know that I have girls and I don't want them to have any issues around food. So it's like this fine line between like letting her have things once in a while, and not, like, I feel like you do a very good job of this with Arden. Like, you say this a lot in your podcast, like she wants to go to the movies and she wants a slushie and she wants, and you just figure out exactly how to correct for it. Mm. I feel like my husband and I are trying to navigate the fact that, we keep a super healthy household, maybe because I know too much or, whatever it is. And then also trying to allow her to have treats and trying to figure out, how to bolus for that.
Yeah, it's so much less about the food and so much more about access and not feeling like there's something that exists that you're not, quote unquote, allowed to do. Like, I think that's really the most important part. Like in the moment, like the blood sugar or the food or whatever, that comes and goes. But the idea that I have diabetes and because of that, there's a thing I can't do, that to me feels like the most dangerous thing to feel. Like I feel
100%.
You know what I mean by that?
And I feel like, yes. And I feel like we're trying, I have this very good friend. She's also a registered dietitian. And we used to joke that, more than anyone, we're going to screw our children up. Like, we both have daughters and it's just going to be one of these things. So I've tried to not make it about that, but there's not, even if I don't keep it in the house, like we'll still go out, and have treats and stuff like that. So I don't want her to feel like, there's something that she can't eat.
Yeah.
And I think we made the mistake in the beginning when she first came home from the hospital. And I feel like you've talked about this too, where like you give all these free snacks, so they were like, she to this day, like cannot look at a string cheese or a hard boiled egg. And I feel like we backed down quite a bit from there. And just allowing her to have what she wants, still trying to keep it healthy, but just figuring out how to bolus for it.
It sounds to me like you're doing a great job. And to be honest, that anything that you've mentioned so far in this time, it's common stuff that happens to everybody. It can feel so like personal and foreign, but the truth is that anyone who has, been diagnosed with type 1 is going to go through most of the things that you've just said, over this entire time. I mean, aside from the main thing and the plane and stuff like that.
Right. And actually, I have another thing to add to going through this time.
Please.
I might have mentioned this in the email to you, but she's also been in a clinical trial.
Okay. Yeah. Which one?
So she's been in the clinical trial for teplizumab.
Oh.
Yes.
Hold on. I just made a note for myself because I have a strong feeling that this episode is going to be called Plane to Maine. Because
I have such a good name for you for the episode.
Wait, you have your own people coming with titles? All right, go ahead. I'm listening.
Okay. This will make sense in a little bit, but the title should be Bernice the Male Owl.
You're not in charge of the titles.
I have such a good story about this title.
Barb, there's part of me that thinks that it would be funnier if I did not let you tell the story about why you think that's the title, and we just let people wonder why you think Bernice the Male Owl would be a good title for the episode. But tell me first about, oh God, here we go. Temizeplob? Did I get it right? Temizeplob? I can't say it.
Teplizumab.
Teplizumab. I have it.
Yes.
Okay. So she was in that trial or is in that trial?
She is currently in the trial.
Okay.
And the way that it works with the trial is that they catch kids within the first 6 weeks of their type 1 diagnosis to put them in the trial. So basically, we arrived back from Maine the end of July, and then she started her first 2-week drug infusion in September. And because of COVID, they couldn't do it here in Chicago. So we had to go to Iowa for 2 weeks.
Oh, I didn't know I was going to get a bonus of you saying Iowa with your Chicago accent. I thought I was only going to get Chicago. Fantastic.
I'm a New Yorker, so it comes across. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's an interesting mix. Hey, this is going to sound crazy. Do you know how to spell teplizumab?
Yes. So it's TEPL. I'm actually writing it. LIZAMUB. Oh no, is it teplizumab? Hold on 1 second. I'm going to have to Google this.
The reason I'm asking is I'm trying to search my site to tell people the episode where they came on and talked about it, because it's super interesting and you might want to go look. But it's a word I can never remember how I found it. It's episode 4.
Yeah,
it's episode 452. So if you're interested in it, hearing about the trial, hearing about why this trial is so interesting, take a look. It's really cool. One of the doc. Have you heard the episode?
Yes.
The co-founder of Prevention Bio came on and talked about it and what they're hoping to do with it. It's really cool. But you tell me about it. So she gets an infusion of this drug monthly. Is that right?
No. So she gets 2. So it's an 18-month study, and she gets 2 infusions that are each 13 days.
Okay. I got you. Oh, she goes every day for 13 days.
Yes.
Wow.
And so it was so interesting because once she got into the trial, they had to inform us that it was no longer being run in Chicago because of COVID, so that we actually had to go to Iowa for her to have this drug infusion.
And you think it was worthwhile? You happy you did it?
I don't know. Time will tell. And actually, I mean, we've sort of been very positive about the whole thing because she's been remote learning the whole year. It made it very easy to go. She could just bring her computer to the hospital every day. And if you're ever going to participate in a clinical trial, like the best time to do it is when the world is shut down.
Gotcha.
So I guess, we'll sort of see what happens, but they just informed me that I guess because they've had such positive results that they've extended the trial an extra 6 months. Okay. So we'll find out in about a year if it worked. And
so so first of all, is this a blinded, like, is it possible you're not getting the drug?
Yes.
Okay. So what is the hope? Like
the hope is that she'll need less insulin over time.
Okay.
That, whatever cells she has in her pancreas. So they catch the kids in their honeymoon phase when there are certain cells in the pancreas that are still producing insulin. And I think it works by two mechanisms. Either it helps to regenerate some of the cells that have died, or the cells that are still there, it helps to kind of like pump them up so that they still continue to produce insulin.
Gotcha. That's very, very interesting. Well, I hope you got the drug, and I hope it does what they're aiming for you. That's really something. Gee, your daughter's a trooper for doing that too.
Yes. And she has a really good attitude. She said that even if it's not helping her, which, we're not so sure, that she feels like it will help other kids eventually. So, that's,
that is very sweet of her. Thank her for me, actually.
Yes,
that's
really, I will.
Really cool.
I will.
All right, Barb, we're going to end here, but I don't know. Tell me about the owl, I guess. Let's go.
Okay. So, so when she was first diagnosed, I got a lot of advice from people about, like things like, cry in the shower, just to kind of find somebody to talk to. And I feel like because she was diagnosed and then we did this clinical trial, it was kind of like go, go, go. And so I didn't really have time to like process all of the emotions of it. But so she had her second drug infusion for teplizumab in March. And we were back in Iowa. And my husband and my younger daughter came to visit. And my younger daughter has this owl. And she said, from when she's 3 years old, that the owl, it's Bernice, but it's a male owl. She's just, for whatever reason, she's always said this. So it's a little joke in our family. Well, when we were on our way back from Iowa, it was like, we felt kind of like this sense of relief that she was done with, the second round of her transfusion. We get home and then we realized that my younger daughter has left the owl in the hotel.
Oh.
And so I lost it. It was like a year's worth of emotions. Like it all came out. And so we called the hotel and I, warned my daughter that the owl might not be there because of COVID, like they probably, anything that they find in the rooms, they have to get rid of. And she's hysterical, like hyperventilating, loves this owl, has had this owl since she's 3. And I got this really nice young woman at the front desk. And she said that she knows what it's like, to have a lovey, and she will check the rooms, and she promises if she finds it, she will send it to us. My daughter is telling me that she will not go to sleep unless I drive back to Iowa and go get the owl. I mean, it was like, I just felt like it was like the whole year, like I'm sure everybody has sort of felt this way with COVID, but it was like COVID, the diagnosis, the clinical trial, just kind of everything at once. Well, anyway, the woman found the owl and we were getting ready to go on spring break. And she ended up sending the owl to the hotel that we were staying at in Las Vegas. And the owl arrived in a FedEx package. And then my daughter opened the owl and just started to cry, just completely lost it. But anyway, when I was thinking about the podcast, I was like, that just kind of sums up our year, like this, tremendous amount of emotion. And
yeah, did you feel like I couldn't stop diabetes and I might not be able to do a lot of things, but I'm not losing this owl? Is that like
100%? Yeah. I mean, you have no idea what lengths I went to get the owl. Like, this young girl who worked in the hotel, she was new to the job, so she didn't even know how to FedEx him. So my sister said to me, oh, but I'm sure if she's a young girl, she has a Venmo account. Just like send her some money and tell her, you'll get her a FedEx number. So I felt like I am going to have this owl sent. And and I even let them know at the hotel in Las Vegas that they were expecting a FedEx from us.
Well, you controlled something. You stopped that meteor from hitting you. You got in front of that one.
Exactly.
The whole time you were talking, I just was waiting for you to mention a person so I could say who, and then it didn't work out. I feel let down that I couldn't make a stupid joke. Well, I'm glad you got Bernice back, and
yes.
But I think that more importantly, right? Like it's a good example of how out of control like diabetes can make you feel. Like
yes.
really that you just, that became so important. Like I get that it's important to your daughter, right? But that became so important, I think is a good example of needing to feel like you're ordering things, something's going your way. I'm glad that it went your way and that your daughter got her owl back. So now I'm assuming she holds it while she's mocking your other daughter with food. So
100%. It sits in the kitchen.
Oh my God, that's something. Well, I really appreciate you doing this. Did you like talking? Did it meet your expectations? I think you were pretty excited to come on. So did it work out?
Yes. I mean, I really feel like this has been such a great resource for us. Like we get excited for when your episodes come out. We've tried a bunch of things that you've discussed. We actually tried, like you had a whole episode on the Warsaw method, which we've tried with my daughter. I feel like it's just made such a huge difference in our lives. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I'll say this to you here because your episode will go up so far in the future. I think I can get away with this, but I have a meeting tonight about turning that Warsaw method into an app so that people can just have it on their phone to figure out the fat for the food.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it takes it's like bringing back math from college or something.
Yeah.
It's such like a mental game. But
so try to imagine.
So helpful.
Try to imagine maybe having a little app on your phone that you can just plug in the fat and everything, and it'll help you get to that answer. So I'm gonna have an app developer calling me tonight. We're gonna try to figure that out.
That's amazing.
Isn't that cool? So, well, I am super happy that you did this, and I'm glad you found the podcast and that things are going well for you guys. I appreciate you. Please tell your daughter I really appreciate her doing a trial. Like anybody who does trials are just helping everyone. So it's a really big deal because I know it's not easy, and it can take up time, some of them. So very cool.
Thank you so much.
Of course. I want to thank you so much for listening and remind you to check out touchedbytype1.org. Find them also on Facebook and Instagram and go see what they're doing and what they're all about. Touched by Type 1. I want to thank Barb for coming on the show and sharing her story. Her story. I want to thank Barb for coming on the show and... All right, let me get a drink. Hold on. I want to thank Barb for coming on the show and sharing her story. There we go. That was easy, huh? And thank you, of course, for listening. I'll be back soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast.